Okay, welcome everybody to our SSDN webinar today related to approaches to reparative metadata projects. This project is possible thank you to support from the Institute of Museum and Library Services through a grant of the Library Services Technology Act through the Florida Department of State Division of Library and Information Services. Is that better? Sound-wise? Okay, perfect, thank you. So thank you to IMLS and our Division of Library and Information Services for providing funding to help support this project. Today, we are going to be hearing from several panelists. We'll be hearing first from Tara Backhouse at the Ah-Tah-Thi-Ki Museum with the Seminole Tribe, Amanda Bozar at the University of South Florida, Deng, Peter Spyers-Duran, and Jeanne Piascik from the University of Central Florida, and Kelley Rowan from Florida International University. And then you'll hear from me last and I'm at Florida State University. And I should say, my name is Keila Zayas Ruiz. I did not say that. I'm the Sunshine State Digital Network Coordinator, and I'll be moderating the presentation today as well. Please be aware that today's presentation is being recorded. You will not be able to unmute yourself, but you can feel free to put questions in the chat at any point during today's presentation. Panelists can decide to answer your question in the chat as well, but we will be reading all the questions at the end of the session for everyone. And if you'd like to save your questions to the end, you're also welcome to do that. We'll be doing all questions at the end. And also, live transcription has been enabled for this session. If you'd like to see captions, please click on the live transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you do not want to see captions, you can also turn them off at that same button. Okay, and without further ado, I am going to pass it along to our first presenter, Tara Backhouse.
Good afternoon, everybody. And this is my cat, Freckles. So I am with the Ah-Tah-Thi-Ki Museum. That's the Seminole Tribe of Florida's museum, if you're not familiar with it. And I'm going to be talking today about a project that we are doing with our 19th and 18th century newspapers. And this project was also made possible in part by a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And to get the slide to advance. Okay, so as I said, we are the Seminole Tribe of Florida's museum. Our mission statement is to respect, celebrate, and preserve Seminole culture and history. And we are located in the southern part of the state, midway between the east and the west coast, a little south of Lake Okeechobee on the Big Cypress Indian Reservation. And our vision statement is similar: to inspire our communities and visitors through the Seminole tribal stories. And both of this really communicate that we consider our main audience to be the Seminole Tribe of Florida, but we do also get visitors from around the state, around the country, around the world. And we don't ever ignore those visitors, but we do hope that we are first and foremost a resource and a benefit for the current Seminole generations and those that follow. And this is our museum library. It is a small library in the back of the museum. It does have about 5,000 books and periodicals, but I think what makes this library really special is that it's an extension of our community archive in the back. So we have a collection of over 100,000 photographs, over 1,000 newspapers, and a lot of this we try to make accessible in the library in various ways. We have binders that have printouts from our database of the photographs, and those are what we pull out when someone comes in and wants to look at family photographs. So that's a good starting place and a good way to make our large collection accessible. We also have copies of some of our 20th century newspapers, and these are the Seminole Tribune newspapers. Those really are valuable to the community because it's the tribe's own newspaper, and they've been chronicling the tribe's lives for decades. So it was these kinds of ways we reach the community that got me thinking about this project that I'm talking about, because seeing the impact that your collection can have on actual people is what makes you start to think about how to use your collection in unique ways. And this is the vault in the back of the library, which was renovated in 2016 through another IMLS grant. And there's a beautiful picture up at the top of when it was new and nothing was installed yet, and we had so much room. Neat. And then there's pictures of it being mostly filled up now with wonderfully stacked and neat boxes that are labeled and flat files full of newspapers. So we're really lucky to have this space. And I started to think about doing this project because I'd seen the 20th century newspapers, especially the mid 20th century newspapers, so much racism and colonialism that was still in those papers. And then seeing the same thing in newspapers that came out in the 1800s. I mean, we are used to seeing the news and being a little suspect of modern media, I think. We're taught that. But how many of us are thinking that that's always how it's been, that in the 1800s, the only way that people got information was through newspapers that were, wildly one-sided and wildly based in a lot of those horrible 19th century attitudes that we think we've moved past. We know we haven't completely moved past them, but I think a way to bring that to today is to look at how things were written in the past to remind us that we haven't changed that much. So I wrote a grant to hire someone to specifically work on that project and I think that has a real benefit because this research coordinator only works on this project and doesn't get pulled in different directions like everybody else in the museum does. And then it was his job, it's been his job for a year to read hundreds, 500 at least, 19th century and 18th century newspapers, and to figure out what in them has something to do with the Seminole tribe, has something to do with Southeastern Native Americans before the Seminole War, Indian removal in general, topics like that are relevant to our mission. And then after reading those, figuring that out, we need to improve our catalog records because our catalog records are ones that we create as employees. They aren't downloaded from a central database. We are the only ones responsible for making them and for what they say and for what the public sees about what we've said about our objects. After this project is done, we will update our online digital collections. We have them on our website, so all these new descriptions will be available on the website, and do articles and presentations like this and social media and find other ways that we can to get our work out there. And these are the kinds of newspapers I'm talking about. They are various sizes and various condition, but they are all very small print and very hard to read. And they all contain a lot of other information besides the information that we are looking for. And that was part of the problem with our cataloging in the first place. Sometimes these newspapers, we'd purchase them in lots, big lots of them. And I wasn't sure that even, that we knew why we had some of these papers from the way they were cataloged. And that's something I wanted to investigate with this project. I thought maybe we'd come across a lot of them that had nothing to do with Indian history, Seminole history, anything that we're interested in. So far, that has not been the case. But I do find it fascinating that the newspapers range from Florida to Maine to California, and even a couple from London. So these are really wide-ranging papers, not just Florida papers. And it always surprises me that they were talking about the Seminole War or Indian removal or any of those colonial problems that far away at the time. You wouldn't think that the Florida War was what people in Boston were talking about in 1833. And this is the Past Perfect is the collections management software that we use. It's particularly a museum collections management software that a lot of mid-sized museums use. And it's not like, I mean, most museum collection management software, at least that I know of, are unique to each institution. They aren't shareable between institutions. Everyone picks what is useful for them, whether it's because of budget or how complicated the system is or what's been used in the past. And I mean, this is often not a benefit because we cannot nationalize what museum collections are in any easy platform, but they do mean that we have a lot of power with our own database to do projects like this and to make an impact. And I think that kind of use of individuality is really something museums focus on. Past Perfect does have useful reporting and search functions in it. So this is how I found the newspapers that we were going to focus on. Found 587 to write the grant. That's how many I pinpointed. And I think some of them were duplicates, and I tried to trim those out. So the number went down from 953 to 587. And then with this result, you can do a number of things. You can view all the catalog records. You can print the results to PDF, but exporting to Excel is the most useful thing. And that's how we got the information about what we needed to do. And I want to back up here a little bit. I thought it'd be interesting to research what collections management textbooks say about what a catalog description should look like. Because I didn't remember ever anyone telling me particularly how to write a description for an object, not in any great detail, how to actually catalog something. And granted, I was looking at books that were a little outdated. This one's from 1991. But there's very little direction on how you write a description for an object. And what this tells you is to write a short description. Don't put unnecessary words in. It doesn't have to be written well. You just have to be able to read it and recognize the object. And while I can see a need for, a benefit for objective scientific description in a lot of cases, I really had to question this advice for this particular project, for this subset of our collection. I don't think these kinds of descriptions were really doing any good for our newspapers. And here's an example of a very laconic description of a newspaper from 1835. It has the date, it has the title, the size, even an image. And the only description it tells you, this has Andrew Jackson's State of the Union address in it on page 3, says something about Indian removal. So maybe this would be all you need to know if you're researching Indian removal, and you can search for that, do a query and find all those papers in our collection. And you have time to look at this hundreds of papers that might come up. But really, you don't know what it says about Indian removal. You don't know if it's worth your time to go look at the paper. Very few people have time to do that kind of research. And I think we have a responsibility, especially as the Seminole Tribe of Florida's Museum, to say something more than this. You could read this and think that we love Andrew Jackson and we just collected his State of the Union address because it said awesome things. But that would not be the case. And you can't tell at all what significance this has to the tribe's history. So this is an example from a different paper of the kind of descriptions that we are replacing those short ones with. It's a lot longer, that's true. And we had to really think about the benefit of a longer description versus the maybe not so much of a benefit of someone who didn't want to read it all. So we decided to do 3 different paragraphs. And the first paragraph of each of these papers is a disclaimer that I thought a good way to really set the tone was to have a disclaimer saying that this newspaper was produced by citizens of a government attempting to colonize Native American people. Many articles contain racist and elitist ideology about Native Americans and other minorities. When reading this newspaper, that implicit bias should be acknowledged and identified. So that people, at least coming onto this catalog record, know they have to reorient their thoughts to this kind of time period and this kind of thought process. And then the next paragraph is just a factual description of what's in the paper. And this one particularly talks about a riot, a protest at an auction where the people that were protesting dressed up as Indians, as a really stereotypical version of Native Americans. The person writing the article makes fun of them, clearly thinks it's a comic incident, even though it was violent and people were injured. And he really praises the authorities there and diminishes the people that were protesting as having any right to be there. So, and you can't see it all, that's not that important. What we added after this is this description of the bias, the way this was written, and that is the most important part of this project. And in this other paragraph, we point out that the way they were describing Indians as a symbol of resistance and wildness, and that they were used to see Indians fighting against the US government. So it gave them, the protesters, some anonymity. They could blame this protest on Indians. And the whole way the Indians are talked about, that women and minorities are talked about there's an implicit racism and sexism and making those people less than the people who were in charge. And this kind of attitude is what pervaded people, that made it okay. It pervaded everyone's kind of thought process. Certainly the people who thought it was okay to then start Indian wars and remove people out of their homelands. So there's a lot of, what we're finding is a lot of these side, they don't necessarily talk about the Seminole War, but they really show the American mentality of the time that led to it. And so this is, one of the challenges is that it has taken a lot longer to do this than we thought, because there's so much in the papers that you have to get through to make sure, to know, is this actually relevant to what our mission is? And we've found a lot more is than we thought we would. And we hired an amazing historian. This is him, Joseph Gilbert. He might be in the audience, I'm not sure. And he's awesome. He's looked through almost all the papers in a year, but he didn't come to us with an amazing knowledge of the Seminole War. I mean, most people who start working for our museum aren't experts in the Seminole tribe at first. It's taken me 15 years to feel like I know something. I'm still definitely not an expert in the Seminole War. So there's this learning curve that would be true for anyone. So this has taken a lot longer, and we've gone through a year of the project. We should be finishing at the end of this month, but luckily we've got an extension on the grant. Joseph will be finishing going through the actual papers by the end of the month. And that's pretty amazing because our 587 papers became about 917. And this was mostly because a few of the newspapers we cataloged as one item turned out to be like 300 newspapers bound in one volume. So those kinds of things when you plan a project, you aren't expecting those challenges. There's also been some conservation concerns and newspapers that were too fragile or had pages stuck together, things like that. And we had to get conservation done on them before Joseph could look at them. So that's also something that took the time. But I'm very proud of him and what he's been able to get done. And it's a really exciting project. And hopefully when we finish in a year, I've written another grant. If we get it, we'll be able to embark on fully digitizing the newspapers. And we'd be working on that with USF and their Access 3D lab. And hopefully after a year or two of digitization, then we'll have the tools we need to get these on some kind of national level, either Library of Congress's Chronicling America program or some other state level or national platform where we can really share our work on a wider scale. Thank you. That is the end of my presentation.
All right. Hi, everybody. I am going to use camera as long as my Wi-Fi will let me. Such a great presentation, Tara. Thank you for sharing. And thank you everyone for being here with us today. It's been a pleasure to be a part of these exciting conversations on reparative metadata that are happening across the state in Florida and across the country right now. And I'm just really excited that we're keeping this going. My name is Amanda Bozar, and I am the curator for digital collections at USF Libraries, where we serve over 50,000 students across 3 campuses. I recently transitioned into this new position from the role of operations manager for special collections. So I've had the opportunity to kind of see this project that we've been undertaking from both sides, both within special collections and within digital collections. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that collaboration and how we're kind of moving this project even more onto the digital side. It is not letting me move forward. Thank you. In 2020, USF Libraries Tampa Special Collections adopted our conscious editing and reparative metadata work as an overarching approach to collections cleanup. And we engaged this initiative across the work being done by librarians, staff, and intern employees. Like many, we were inspired by those forging the way in these areas, including UNC Chapel Hill. The department also did a formal reassessment of strategic collecting areas in 2019, which helped us to kind of frame our collection priorities as well as our reparative metadata priorities. We underwent 3 platform migrations over the past 3 years, moving from Archon to Archive Space, Aleph to Alma, and so back to digital collections or digital commons, so that we've had the opportunity to kind of see where many of our cleanup issues were most needed, which has been a big help. That's the silver lining of 3 migrations at once, I suppose. In the past 2 years, our department has adopted practices to integrate this work into collections processing, finding aid cleanup, and rare book cataloging as part of this holistic reconciliation process. As part of a merger between special collections and digital collections in 2021, as well as the large-scale migration from a SOBEC CM platform to digital commons, I have begun the implementation of conscious editing into our digital collections in kind of a steady, holistic way. The initiative to make our special and digital collections more inclusive through the removal of hurtful language and the application of more accurate terminology has been a true team effort. I'll do my best throughout this presentation to kind of acknowledge the work of my colleagues here, because we've all really done this together. It's really taken a big team of us to kind of initiate as much of this as possible. And I just want to be clear that it really was collaboration for us that helped this kind of move forward. See if I can. Keila, can you move it forward? Thanks. From the start, we foresaw conscious editing projects as starting with our physical collections and working their way into their digital counterparts. Conscious editing initiatives in our department formally started with our director, Tamara Taylor, who adopted these practices to rectify far outdated and just largely offensive finding aids related to our African-American experience collections. We built on the success of her work by expanding into other areas that needed some remediation, both in their physical and their digital metadata. LGBTQ+ studies has been a collecting area for our department since roughly 2006, but it has really come back into focus in recent years with additional donations, increased interest from student populations, and subject area expert on our team, Sydney Jordan, who has effectively integrated the collections into courses and internships. Named as a strategic collecting area in 2019, LGBTQ+ studies has been one of our key focus areas for engaging in reparative metadata to date. On the screen, you can see some images from our Bobby Smith photograph collection that I'm going to discuss in a bit more detail later on, but I kind of wanted to show it in its archival form as well as in its digital form. And along the way, we found that sometimes we had to do a bit of back and forth in terms of physical and digital editing by updating maybe a collection name in both places first, and then engaging in that kind of subject and abstract metadata after the fact. It wasn't as linear as we thought that it might have been at the beginning. We've also made it a point to kind of revisit our old digital exhibits. We have quite a few of them at USF to ensure that those are also reflecting updates to our collection names and descriptions. And we usually take that on in the final stages of what we're working on. You go to the next slide. Due to the scope of the work we hope to accomplish, we knew it was important to leverage our entire team. The slide here is showing a piece from Sydney that she did at a presentation at ACERL last year. And what she was showing here is the amount of work that we were kind of putting into determining what needed to be done for conscious cataloging. So she was training a couple of our interns who were going to help us reevaluate catalog records. And we started to, as a group, adopt this kind of almost a small reading group. We exchanged resources. We made sure that everyone was able to kind of follow along with the new trends in the field, take those leads wherever they would go, and then apply those best practices to our work. And we did this from top level of faculty through staff, through interns, just to make sure that everyone knew that they were a part of the process. Next slide. The introduction of the conscious editing internships are what really helped us launch this process forward. Our conscious editing interns have been funded through foundation accounts. So we have not pursued a specific grant for conscious editing to date, but we've been able to use foundation accounts to fund the work that we've done so far, as well as working it into our general job assignments that we've been doing in the department. To date, we've hosted 2 interns to work on reparative metadata issues. Both of those students have presented their work at national or international conferences, and they've also either continued on in the department or returned to work with us in a different capacity. In addition, both of them have also switched their grad school plans to get MLIS degrees because they said, one of them said, quote, that they felt like this work actually really made a difference. So that was very nice to hear from them, that they felt like what they were working on was really important. The first intern that we brought on focused on book collections with diverse themes. And this was our Hipple collection of young adult literature. There's a lot of material in those collections that was cataloged relatively recently, but the catalog records were pretty thin. So the search terms were not as effective as they could be. They were also all Library of Congress subject headings for the most part, and not very effective for what people were searching now. So it had a lot of material that the student was able to engage with. Our second student focused on archives and digital collections, and I particularly wanted to hire someone for this position that could engage with the digital collections aspect. I knew that we were nearing the end of the migration. I wanted someone who could really kind of dig into what needed to be done within physical archive and apply that to digital collections and follow that process through. And Emma was able to do that with the Bobby Smith photography collection through the remediation, the finding aid, and then editing of the digital collection metadata. Next slide. So when it comes to doing the work that is actually needed for digital collections, our recent migration to digital commons has made our workflow a lot easier than it had been previously. And this has been really helpful when it comes to hosting it as a project that we can engage interns with, as well as partners outside of our own department if we're going with subject experts across the campus. To conduct conscious and reparative metadata work, we've been teaming up with experts as much as possible and letting them kind of help us guide the language that we should be using. We provide them with front-end access or access to maybe a hidden digital collection that isn't yet published, but is available for them to browse online. And then we give them the batch revised spreadsheet that's available through Digital Commons. It might be similarly available in other platforms, depending on how your digital collections is hosted. The batch revise spreadsheet allows us to quickly update several metadata fields at once and allows the student or us or the partner to kind of view all of these together, see where there are similarities and differences, make those changes without having to click into every record. Being a relatively small team with a very large collection is also helpful for us because we're able to export spreadsheets that people work through rather than training multiple people on a platform that they may not have used before and may never use again, and providing them with temporary access to something that we have to create an administrator account for and then remove that access for it. So in terms of just practicality, the use of a batch revise spreadsheet's been much more helpful for us than getting people in on the back end. And once that metadata is up in Digital Commons, we're able to do cross-linking back to finding aids and to catalog records, basically ensuring that access and appropriate information is correct across all of our platforms. Next slide. When it comes to outcomes for digital collections, we're still very early in the process, but we have completed a few collections that we're pretty proud of. We are focused across the board on providing agency, visibility, and respect to the subjects and/or creators of the collections as appropriate. And on screen here are some examples from the Bobby Smith photography collection that Emma worked on with Sydney and I. The collection was originally named for the donation facilitator, Rex Maniscalco, who donated their own materials as part of a separate collection. So there was also some confusion. Was this from the Rex Maniscalco collection or the Bobby Smith photos? So it helped clear it up, and also just to elevate Bobby to ownership of the collection. Since Bobby's the one who took the photos, Bobby visited them in spec call. And so we've done some work to really kind of push Bobby to the forefront of the collection. In addition, the old collection description reflected some of the confusion that has occurred over the years according to or related to Bobby's preferred pronoun, and Bobby's gender identity. And we've since been able to rectify this through some research and contact with people who knew Bobby. And the identification of Bobby as female from the original was removed from the description to focus on the art created by him and his significance to the local LGBTQ+ community instead. A prominent link to the finding aid takes viewers who find the collection via Digital Commons back to archive space, where they can learn more and see an inventory for additional items. Only about half the collection's digitized. And at the item level, Emma also removed euphemisms or incorrect terms, as well as improved the searchability to include names of prominent LGBTQ+ bars and spaces around Tampa, making the collection more discoverable and connected with the community when possible. Next slide. So lessons learned: collaborate, invest time, share your results, and keep learning. We have found that it is so important to work across our team. As I said before, currently, I am evaluating digital collections for outdated language and metadata. And as I go through this process, I'm working with the rest of our special collections team to ensure that corrections that I make are appropriate and fitting with the collection that I'm working on. It's a project that does take time. Tara alluded to this as well. But I think that this work is not simply important, but it's necessary. As a new generation of researchers is engaging with our digital collections and more frequently in our hybrid world, outdated search terms are simply no longer useful to discover collections that they're looking for. They're also searching at new research angles that may not have been thought about when collections were originally posted or presented. The work that is kind of snippeted at the top of this slide here is from an LSU's diaries. All of the material related to it was about seminal wards or surgery, a doctor's papers. And we found that it actually had some pretty obvious queer themes throughout the work. And LSU's wrote a lot about his sexuality. And so we've included that material to make sure that it's discoverable to researchers who are studying 19th century LGBTQ+ studies in Florida. So to further engage researchers, we think that it's important to share this work and show the faculty and student populations that we are making changes and that the archives are evolving with them and making these research materials easier to access and find and use for their research findings at the end of the day. And for me personally, I recognize that it's vital to keep learning and joining conversations on this issue. Keeping myself aware of the challenges is definitely a key part of my professional development in maintaining our digital collections as living collections. And I work with our department cataloger, who's regularly, keeping me updated on what she's working on, work with our archivists and see how they're approaching the issue, and so that we can all stay in conversation. Next slide. So what are the challenges for us? Like many, trying to maintain like LCSH headings for a linked data project that the library had undertaken. We often found that some of the terms were contradictory to maintaining our ethical or accurate metadata desired by our researchers. So we're approaching alternatives to that and kind of working our way through what it would mean for the linked data initiative. We've been complementing with terms that are put out by other schools to make sure that at least we're using similar terms across campuses and across schools to kind of help with that linking in the long term. And having our interns also kind of engage in the conversation of what it means to add terms to standardized authority listings, which they found really helpful for kind of understanding how libraries work on the back end. And COVID, of course, has to make an appearance in all webinars now. So our first conscious editing intern was in January of 2021. And we were all very hopeful that by the time they started, we interviewed in August. We were like, by the time Mimi starts in January, they'll be in the building full time. This was not the case because of another wave. So we had to kind of adjust how Mimi's internship was structured. And they were able to do a lot of kind of catalog work on the back end, evaluating records rather than simply working kind of in our physical archival collections, which is part of the reason why their internship was focused more on the cataloging side than the archival side. By the time Mimi got their bearings and really started to move through the extensive list of more than 5,000 books that are in our Hippo collection, their internship was over though. So we kind of got off the ground, and then felt like it was time to end it, and we wanted to sustain going forward. And so this is part of the reason why we decided to keep working with interns and keep them on board as long as possible, because finding the right people and keeping them is always tough. Especially when you're working with interns and students, they're on a cycle, they're going to graduate. So working with our team, our full-time staff, hiring people who are aware of these issues and sensitive to conscious editing and reparative metadata issues is really important to us going forward. And so we're eager to kind of keep developing our team and maintaining this project for years to come. Next slide. So finally, as I've stressed this whole time, really, Conscious Editing Initiative and Spec Call has been such a team effort, which I really appreciate. I could not have moved our effort into digital collections without the work being done in the stacks. I've included a few of the folks here on the slide who've been particularly active, but there are many more. So thank you for listening, and feel free to reach out to me or any of them if you know them. Thanks.
Thank you, Amanda and Tara, for sharing your experiences. Thank you to Keila and the SSBN for organizing today's program, and thank you also to everyone for attending. I'm Zayas, Metadata librarian from UCF, and I'm going to introduce our project of analyzing and enhancing juvenile biography subject headings for equity, diversity, and inclusion, EDI. And with my colleagues, Peter, Spyers-Duran, and Jeanne Piascik. Peter is our special formats cataloger, and Jeanne is our cataloging department head. Keila, I don't know, it's not moving. Okay, reflecting biases in cataloging and classification historically, the Dewey Decimal Classification and the Library Congress subject heading have long favored the white Christian, American, Western European, and the heterosexual males. Same for the Berman for decades for LC to change some of its biased headings. One of the other prominent cases is the library community's campaign for change the subject illegal alien, which can be considered an example of radical cataloging. In providing metadata for the library catalog and the archives, it is important to be sensitive, to the described object on people's race, ethnicity, culture, gender, religion, etc. And for example, in bringing racial consideration into catalog's judgment, we can name white ethnicities using words like Southerner and include racial identities for own people in describing ethnicity, be considerate, precise, and less prejudicial. For example, use the ethnic group's name, specific name, precise like more such as Jew, Gujaratis, Gujaratis, rather than only the generic term like East Indians or Indic people. In the radical archives movement, a panel of archivists discussed how they wrote or rewrote descriptions for archives in culturally competent approaches. Gender consideration also play a significant role in inclusive cataloging, gender minorities, and the ways that they like to be called need to be respected. Other approaches in making the description more inclusive is to be considerate when describing disability and to add multilingual access for cultural heritage materials. The inclusive metadata and conscious editing resources compiled by the SSDN's metadata working group is a good resource to refer to. Librarians at UCF undertook a project in 2021 and 2022 to analyze a juvenile biography collection at the Curriculum Material Center for Subject Biases and to enhance the subjects to reduce its biases based on the EDI principles for better discovery. And we also started to audit a section of biographies in the main library collection for EDI. Next, Peter will describe the juvenile biography audit in detail.
Good afternoon. A $2,000 UCF Professional Development Research Award was used to pay a student worker to analyze 952 juvenile biographies in the Curriculum Materials Center. For each biography, the student worker answered Qualtrics survey questions and input data. The data was compiled in Microsoft Excel and used to enhance bibs with local subject headings, as well as Library of Congress subject headings for gender, race, ethnicity, and nationality. Statistical analysis was also performed. Next slide. There were 39 Qualtrics survey questions. There's a sample of them here, really ranging from like who processed the item to how many LCSH speak to race, ethnicity. Next slide.
It's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of fun.
That's okay. So in looking at the statistics, for LCSH, the minimum number of subject headings in a bib was 2. The maximum was 20, the mean 7.56, and the mode, or the most common number of headings, was 6. For the non-LCSH, the minimum number was 0, the maximum 25, the mean 6.88, and the mode 0. Next slide. And looking at how cataloging practices related to race and ethnicity changed over time, the percentage of bibs with LCSH related to race and ethnicity held fairly constant over the decades. The percentage of bibs with non-LCSH related to race and ethnicity drops off substantially before 2010, dropping from 22.24% to 4.121%. Next slide. And looking at how cataloging practices related to gender changed over time, the percentage of bibs with LCSH related to gender holds steady over the decades and only drops off from 1980 to 1989. By contrast, the percentage of bibs with non-LCSH related to gender drops off before 2010, going from 26.24% to 5.61%. Next slide. This slide presents a statistical analysis of gender. Over 66% of the bibs LCSH do not include gender. Over 80% of the bibs non-LCSH do not include gender. The high percentage of bib records lacking gender-related subject headings demonstrated to us the need for them to be added to the bibs. And while 55.88% of the biographies were about males, only 4.2% of the bib records have LCSH that indicate male, and only 2.31% of bib records have non-LCSH indicating male. Counterintuitively, the low number of subject headings indicating males demonstrates that male is the default or assumed gender of the subject headings. And again, this demonstrates the need to us, or demonstrated to us, the need for more gender-related subject headings to be uniformly added to the bib records. Next slide. This slide presents a statistical analysis of race and ethnicity. And while 53.18% of biographies are about white Caucasians, 0 bibs had the white Caucasian or any sort of white or Caucasian Library of Congress subject heading. The omission of white Caucasian from LCSH demonstrates that white Caucasian is the default or assumed race of the biographies and demonstrates the need for enhancement. Next slide. This slide talks about the sources that were used to confirm the race and ethnicity of the biographies. Sources include the book cover, book summaries, and publishers' websites. Okay, next slide. And this slide talks about the nationality represented by the LCSH and non-LCSH of our juvenile biographies. A low percentage of records reflecting nationality demonstrates subject heading enhancement would be beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for the statistical analysis of subject headings in the juvenile biographies. Now I'll talk about the headings characteristics a bit more. Prior to the audit, the total number of the LCSH headings for race and ethnicity was 765. Analysis of the LCSH headings indicates terms started with African Americans appeared about 174 times. The other race ethnicity terms appeared less times. For example, Chinese American 4 times, Hispanic American 3 times. In the African American related terms, speaking of gender, only women are indicated, such as African American women authors, African American women civil rights workers. And both of those slides, on those two graphics, there is no mention of white, men, or just Americans, which are taken as defaults. In this graph of nationality-related terms frequency prior to audit, you can see that American showed close to 300 times. And this information is mostly from the heading African Americans, while the majority, the white Caucasian Americans, are not represented. They are taken as default. Meanwhile, it shows that the collection does embrace many biographies from a variety of nationalities. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jeanne to talk about post-audit metadata enhancement.
Good afternoon. For our post-audit metadata enhancement, we put our local subject headings in the MARC field 690. These were added as local extension fields in ALMA. First, we exported the records, added the 690 fields with a local extension subfield on them in MarcEdit, and then we re-imported the records. The general structure of the subject headings is has biography coming first, followed by gender, race, or race, ethnicity, or nationality as subdivisions. In total, we added 929 local headings for gender to 925 records, 1,222 local headings for race and race ethnicity for 914 records, and 821 local headings for nationality to 774 records. Next slide, please. We also added 386 fields for author creator characteristics for approximately 147 records representing autobiographies. We used LC demographic group terms and added terms for ethnicity and cultural groups, nationality and regional groups, and also gender groups. We also added terms from Homosaurus for records concerning LGBTQIA+ people, and added LCSH for 195 of the records that were previously lacking LC subjects. Next slide, please. For LCSH, which are biased or problematic, local subject heading was added, which was more inclusive. For example, a record that had a 650 of Cherokee Indians, which is an LCSH term, we added a 690 local term for Cherokee American. Other actions that we would like to take in the future would include submitting SACO proposals for more inclusive subject headings, and also creating terms on other platforms such as Wikidata. Next slide, please. Other future steps include continuing to promote and practice EDI cataloging, and to also collaborate with other departments on collection audits. Limitations include staff time and competing priorities, which translates to we need more people and more money. Currently, we are working on extending the current project to include adult level biographies in the main library. And we would also like to conduct research to see if and how our enhancements promote discovery and access. Next slide, please. And we'd like to acknowledge all of the members of the SSDN Metadata Working Group. And here are some references. Thank you.
All right, we're going to see if the slide deck works. It does, yay. Okay, I'm Kelley Rowan. I'm the Digital Archives Librarian at FIU and Florida International University. And I'm going to start with a little overview of our department and the size to give you an idea of how we're having, the challenges we're facing and how we're having to deal with this project. So our Digital Collection Center is the one that started our reparative metadata initiative. When it consists of Jamie Rogers, our assistant director. We have 2 digital librarians, and I kind of parsed out our digital humanities librarian because generally her work isn't falling into working on reparative metadata. And then we have 2 full-time staff. So this is the group, and I would probably pull out at least 2 people and say they're not really doing anything with this initiative at the moment, and maybe 2 others are kind of like available and they definitely do help, and 2 people that are really spearheading, the initiative. So it's a fairly small group. The library overall, we have our Digital Collection Center, Cataloging, Sound and Image, Special Collections and University Archives. We have lots of other departments. Obviously, these are the ones that we are working with currently on reparative metadata. We would love to see interest from, at least one more department, but our GovDocs, but right now they are a department of 1. So their time is very limited. Needless to say. So what we've done with this initiative so far is just within digital collections, we started a scan of the collections, and really everybody helped with this so that we could develop a thesaurus, and we just used a spreadsheet, and we just went through. Actually, I was the first person to start just a scan of the collections, and what I found was that overall we have our collections are pretty benign in the sense that we don't host like a really in-depth, let's say, Civil War collection, or anything about let's say the mission culture, the missions and stuff, things that would obviously have a lot of very troublesome metadata. So we developed a thesaurus that is specific to our collections. And this is where everyone in our digital collection center got involved and added, and I'm going to talk a little more about this in the next slide. So I'll show you examples in a moment of like what we're doing with that. We created a shared resource document where anybody can go in and add different thesauri they found, what they're using as a resource to figure out what terminology is better, articles, anything else relevant to the work we're doing. And then I set up a listserv so that those departments and those of us involved in this have an easy, quick way to share webinars, resources, progress as we go. Our cataloging department has been very active on the listserv, which is fantastic. Other departments a little quieter, but again, we have varying numbers of people in these departments. Some of them are quite small. So to start off, to bring this out of digital collections and into the wider library, Jamie and I put together, our assistant director and I put together a series of meetings. First, we did an overview meeting with anybody in the library. I mean, everybody was welcome, even let's say reference anybody. And then we set up, just to give them an idea of the project, what we're hoping to accomplish, gauge interest, that type of stuff. And then we set up individual meetings with each department, and we met with each department to figure out what they're capable of, what they have time for, how we can assist. And we learned a lot from that. So that was really, meeting with each department independently was really interesting. Right now, we are on creating a harmful language statement. And to get this done, what we did is we moved to creating a small core group of librarians that were available at this time. Everyone's got a different schedule, they're involved in different projects. So we tried to pick people from one person from each department so that we can work on creating, this is like an overarching harmful language statement for FIU libraries, and then departments, if they feel they need collection level, item level, whatever they need, that will have to most likely move to their department. So just step back for a moment to the thesaurus because I thought it deserved its own slide. Right now, I feel like we have about 6,000 terms that definitely need to be changed. And that doesn't include the one you're looking at over on the right. So this is our aggrandizing language. We have a tab in the spreadsheet just for that. And this contains probably another couple thousand, but we want to go back and look at those, much like mentioned in the previous, by the previous speaker, the idea that, some things are just assumed, like male, right? And that's showing that that's the default culture. And so we have this one, like when we're talking about somebody, let's see, maybe they're a known slaveholder, but every word about this guy is like the ambitious, successful, respected, significant, prominent guy, So we're looking at words like that too, and whether they need to be there, whether they should be there, if they're not also being applied to other people, to women, to Black Americans, or Hispanic, or Native Americans, or anybody else. And if they're not, which they're kind of not, then maybe they don't need to be always applied to white men either. So right now in our thesaurus, we have these tabs. So age is currently empty. We don't have anything relating to age, but it's there in case something pops up, right? Because this is going to be a living document, a living exercise, right? You're always going to have to be looking at your metadata as it's being created and coming in. We have Black culture, disability, history and society, outdated terms, religion, various other ethnic groups. I lumped them all into one only because our collections were not, you know, if I created one, let's say for Japanese Americans, we had like one record. So it didn't make sense to make it its own tab for us. This is like, again, specific to our collections. White culture, looking for derogatory terms there too. And then aggrandizing probably fits into a lot of that. And then women. So this is what our thesaurus is right now. It's a spreadsheet. And so that's kind of a next step for us, is to figure out what this will be, like where it will live, where can we make this easily acceptable as people, or accessible as people work on metadata. So I'm going to jump right into challenges and lessons learned to talk a little more about each of these processes. So coming from the thesaurus, that is the next thing that we need to figure out, is what is the best way to keep this this thesaurus long-term, probably maybe in a libguide, just because it's something we have access to, it's something we can make use of. So, you know, we need to figure that out, because I think that would also really help people. For instance, our Special Collections University Archives, also a very small department. And they've made it pretty clear they don't have time to be going back and fixing metadata, but they can fix it going forward right now. But if we've got a thesaurus in a place that's easily accessible, it would probably be easy enough for a student worker, if they have extra time, or if they could take on this project, you know, to help them with that. So, and then we will need to look long-term at who will maintain the LibGuide. Is it going to be a group effort, a small group? Is it going to rotate? These are things we need to talk about still. On this slide, the first two are kind of, you know, these are our challenges, right? Staff and faculty shortages, right? And then work plans are full, and these two kind of go together, of course. So as I was saying before, some departments aren't going to be able to jump right into fixing current, you know, metadata that's there. They can only do better metadata going forward, at least right now. Because some of our departments, like I said, are one person departments. Two of them are now. Another one just lost another person. So this is probably everyone's problem, right? So what we've done is we have, as I mentioned, with creating the harmful language chain, is we've created small groups of people that are interested, really invested in this initiative, and available at the moment. And I think going forward, what we'll probably do as we work on, let's say, a LibGuide, is again, do this in small groups. And then that way, perhaps we have a very invested colleague who's very interested in this, but she was not available at this time to work on the harmful language, but she may be available as we move on to LibGuide, and it's possible she can be part of that group. So this might be the way to allow everybody to do something, you know, to work on it, that's interested in working on it, but it doesn't have to be right at that moment. It can be whatever project's available at the time when they're available. All right, so like I said, we did meet with every department. This, I felt like, was really useful because our departments really did have differing concerns. So sound and image, S&I, the first one there, was really concerned with diacritics. They're dealing with a huge, amazing, wonderful Cuban collection of music, the Diaz collection. And of course, there's diacritics in these Cuban names. And you know, the point was brought up, of course, that if you can't even spell somebody's name correctly, you know, that's also maybe not as bad as some of the harmful language, but it's another way of not being respectful. So they really were focused on that. And that's probably because our own digital repository in the past has been a little fussy with diacritics, so that's something that's on their mind. Cataloging mentioned that we should probably think about writing our own policies that allow alternatives to Library of Congress, as mentioned by some of the other speakers, that they are not fully updated with better terminology. And so if we can do that, on our own, then that would be very helpful. Our special collections and university archives, of course, are creating finding aids all the time. So this is something that they are interested in going and doing, some past work on, some reparative work on. And it's definitely something they're working on as they move forward. So departments do have different needs. And that's something we definitely learned. So universalization is kind of like a psychology term or a philosophy, kind of both psychology philosophy term. And usually this is something that happens when someone is just trying to sidestep, an issue. And we had a case of this where, we're working towards fixing our metadata and someone brings up, yeah, but Library of Congress has these problems and not everything's fixed there. So there's nothing we can do, just kind of throwing your hands up. And it kind of brought everything to a standstill for a little bit. It's a good point. What I kind of realized looking back on that one, I was very busy at the time. I should have redirected that much quicker than I did and got everybody back on track. We're back on track now, thankfully. But it kind of made everybody go, oh. Our listserv kind of came to an end. You didn't see activity there. So we're getting everybody back on track. But one of the things I think, if we had shared, maybe if we had gone back and shared what we learned from each department, I think this department might have seen that cataloging was already really addressing that problem and had ideas about it. So going forward, we need to be sure we find a way that we can share the lessons learned from every department so that we're not creating like knowledge silos within the library. And I think that'll be helpful. So next steps for us, most likely a LibGuide. I should have put that in quotes or something, but most likely a LibGuide for a thesaurus. That would be, easy for like a student intern to access. Maybe collection level statements, that depends on the department. Some of our librarians and special collections and archivists brought up decision trees. I think this is a great idea for helping decide, on terminology. And then community help, using the community to help us identify individuals so that we can have better metadata as well. And those are kind of an overview of our challenges and our lessons learned. I think that's my last slide. Okay, that's my last slide. And that's where we are right now. And my goal for this summer, hopefully, is to put together a really comprehensive plan, outline some small groups that can work on a few of these things, and really initiate that coming this August, and move through this hopefully faster than we have over the past year and get a lot more work done this coming year. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelley. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some of the implementation work that we've been doing at Florida State University specifically. So just a little bit of background on our work so far. We were able to be listed, this work was able to be listed as a strategic priority for the libraries on our strategic plan. And we were able to secure some funding from carry forward funds to hire a part-time employee to focus on this work. The focus of the initiative is to address inequalities and injustices, but also to kind of share in a community of practice and understanding of inclusive metadata practices. And then also to increase accessibility of our collections to underserved and unserved communities in our area. So our collections have a heavy focus on local history. In North Florida, that has a lot to do with plantations. We also have several civil rights collections, and we have political collections due to the nature of being in the capital city. So all of those have various implications related to them. We have like the Tallahassee National Organization for Women records. We have some political collections from Claude Pepper, who advocated for elder and disability rights. And then we have some civil rights collections as well. Most used of our civil rights collections are collections related to the murder of Emmett Till and the subsequent trial of his murderers. So those all have nuances and complications with them and require different kinds of attention. So that's just a little bit of background on the collections that we're dealing with that we really wanted to focus on in this initiative. So far, what we've been able to do, we were able to hire somebody in October of 2021 in that part-time position. So not quite, it's about 10 months, I guess, of work that we've been able to do so far. We've performed a combination of computational queries and manual analysis on our archive space records, as well as our digital metadata. And digital is our digital library repository platform that's based in Islandora 7. And using those computational queries, we were able to create a priority list for collections that need the most help with redescription. We've been documenting our workflows as well, and we have created a harmful content statement that explains why these types of materials are collected and preserved and presented online. And along with that statement, we have created a reporting process to allow users to report any issues that they find in those two spaces specifically related to digital and special collections. We haven't done that yet with our cataloged materials, but that is something that we hope to do later this year. In addition, a little bit of context about that statement. We adapted the statement used by the Digital Library of Georgia, which was designed for users at an 8th grade reading level, so that recognizing that our users are a wider audience than just the academic community. We have a lot of the public that uses our digital resources as they're openly available. And then we've also created a document related to our guidelines. And this document not only assists our redescription efforts, which our part-time employee is undertaking, but also informs our new description going forward. So it allows someone to focus on doing that remediation of past metadata, legacy metadata, but then provides some guidelines for new description going forward. And we've been able to incorporate some of that guidelines into some new LGBTQ oral histories that we have been incorporating in our digital library. And we've started a pilot project for remediation, and that I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later in my presentation. And I'm going to try to speed it up so we have at least 10 minutes for questions. So keep an eye on the clock. So I'm going to talk about our computational queries first. And again, we did use a mix of computational and manual queries for analysis. We decided to use Nvivo, which is a survey analysis software. But I'll talk a little bit about how we came to that decision, but we used Nvivo to run large-scale word frequencies to help us identify harmful and inaccurate language, because we're also focusing on the accuracy of our records. And then once we had the results of those word frequency queries, we checked those manually to check for context and ensure that the context that the language was being used was appropriate, or if it needed to be flagged for remediation. We used the flagging capabilities in Nvivo to then determine which collections were in most need of remediation to create our priority list. And we then started on our pilot project. So before we decided on Nvivo, we tried a couple of other different programs related to text analysis to help us identify potential issues in our records. The person that we hired to take the part-time position does have a digital humanities background, so they had some experience using RStudio, which is used in digital humanities for text analysis, and we had some moderate success with that because she did have experience in that area. But we also wanted to try other programs since our studio does require quite a bit of a learning curve. So she also experimented with Voyant, which is a web-based text analysis program. But it does have some cons in that you can't really save results and start back later. And you have less control over your queries than you do in RStudio. One of the drawbacks too of using RStudio is there is not really a lot of wiggle room. You have to try different word iterations and things like that. It doesn't have like a lot of flexibility there. So we used Nvivo to tabulate the word frequencies across collections from our digital metadata, which is again our digital repository. And the word frequencies can be viewed in 4 different options. So you can view them as a summary, as a word cloud, a tree map, or a cluster analysis. And here on the slide, you see an example of a cluster analysis using Nvivo. We consulted the summary results for the word frequency calculations to quickly scan for red flags in the language. And then we did reverse searches in Nvivo. We started with racism or racist to kind of get us going. And we pulled up several collections that use these terms, and those are listed here. And then we went through the records to identify how those terms were being used and if they needed to be enhanced in any way. So we used some resources to get us started in identifying which terms we might want to look for and identify in any of our records. So our part-time employee consulted the racial slur database, which unfortunately is a thing that exists, but is something that has been helpful in identifying potentially derogatory language. And then we also used the APA recommendations for inclusive language. And we used the examples of what not to do to see if any of those examples existed in our records. And then from there, we started using miscellaneous terms. So like Kelley was saying, we started searching for aggrandizing language or laudatory language to identify any remediation that might be necessary there. We found a lot of records that had the word interest or interesting in them, which implies archival bias. So those were also flagged. And then once we had our collections flagged in Nvivo, we then started looking for broader themes. So any ableist, ageist language. Erasure is a really difficult one to identify because it's hard to find something that's not there. But we started doing pronoun searches and title searches. So like Mrs., Mr., things like that is how we tried to identify any gender erasures. We look for homophobic or incomplete and inaccurate records, laudatory language, and then racist and sexist language as well to help us flag records in different categories. So this is an example of an incomplete description that we were able to identify using this method. So the Keith Beauchamp audiovisual recordings is related to our Emmett Till collections. They're audio and video oral histories of interviews that this film producer created around the Emmett Till story. And we were able to add some subject headings to enhance the findability of that collection and make the phrasing less neutral, as well as dedupe the titles, because a lot of the titles were identical. So we wanted to make sure that we disambiguated the records from each other. And then another example, and what we did to fix it was related to our St. Augustine papers, which is related to plantation and sharecropping in North Florida. And we added some additional context for some of the materials in that collection related to permission slips and what those meant during that time period. So that was something that we were able to do with that process as well. And then in terms of erasure of women, we were able to use the search for Mrs. to identify someone who was being identified by her husband's name only. Then we were able to identify that woman and include her name in the record rather than her name as her husband's name. So that was one way that we rectified this particular case of erasure. We're also working right now on identifying people of color in our plantation records so that we can name them when possible as well. That's proving to be a bit more difficult because those records are not as readily available as a prominent white woman's name would be. So that is something we're aware of and working to address as well. And then our guidelines document, just some more information on that. It does contain various examples and then provides guidance for how to address that. But it also provides guidance for how to do that base description from the beginning that includes respectful language for the subject as well. So what we've learned so far is that there's lots of trial and error in this work, and it's not a linear process, as we all know, I'm sure, as we've been talking about these projects. So we've had a lot of room, luckily, to do some experimentation and determine what works well and what doesn't for us. And we've been documenting that process throughout so that we have a better understanding of the different effort levels and things like that that need to go into the different types of analysis. And then some benefits of doing some of these computational queries was that they provide a broad survey of language. It's easier to search across collections for a specific language. And it can give you an overall sense of what's needed for redescription in collections. And it did help us inform that priority list that we created. There are lots of limitations, obviously, also with computational queries. It can't replace the person when you're looking at context for the language. And it helps us determine whether a term is being used in an innocuous way or in a harmful way. And it also allows us to add context when necessary. And currently, computational methods don't allow us to read material that is visual. So we can examine a photograph that way. And if the description is inadequate for visual material, that's something that is difficult to identify using computational queries. And like I mentioned earlier, erasure is a really difficult thing to identify because if something's not there, you can't search for it. So that's something that we're working on and we recognize, which is why we're also doing that manual analysis when we can. So what we're working on next is we are focusing on our Bradford Epps family collection, which is a collection of plantation records, as well as some Reconstruction era records from a prominent landholding, slaveholding family in North Florida. And so we're working to identify people and add context, as well as enhance subject headings and dates. Something we noticed while we were doing this is a lot of dates are wrong too. So we're working on fixing all of that at the same time. And yeah, so this is kind of a repeat of the previous slide, so I'll move on so that we can get to questions. And again, I want to thank all of our presenters today for sharing their work, and thank the Division of Library and Information Services, as well as IMLS, for providing funding for this training. Okay, and so I saw some questions in the chat earlier. I'll read those out. And if you have new questions, please feel free to add those. So our first question is for Tara, I think, or maybe Amanda. I think it's for Amanda. You say the LCSH were not as helpful for subject access, but have you submitted any SACO proposals to Library of Congress? And SACO is the Subject Authority Cooperative funnel that allows you to submit changes to Library of Congress, for those who are not aware of what that is. Is that something that you all have considered, Amanda?
It is something that we have considered. We have a list of about 20 terms that our two interns have put together in conversation with us and what we've done. And I saw that there was kind of a follow-up asking like what types of places we are pulling language from. Our cataloger for the physical collections, she does use a 653 field so that she has an indexed local field to include terms from like Homosaurus and GSSO while we wait for something like a SACO request to go through. So those terms are getting included. In the digital collections, we're not really limited in the fields that we can use. It's pretty general. And so far, I've just been trying to keep them in line with an overarching project that we have going on with linked data on campus, but also including additional terms as necessary. So we're doing a bit of a hybrid.
Thank you. And then the next question was from our presenters at UCF. Do you feel like you found enough information on book jackets, websites, etc., to determine gender accurately? It feels potentially problematic to assign gender unless explicitly stated by the person. And Sai replied in the comments saying, we were not able to add gender, race, ethnicity, and nationality information for all biographies, right? We were trying to use the gender information the author and or the book provided. So it sounds like they weren't able to do it for every case, but they, or Peter, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, we actually collected statistics on this, and so 70% of them, we were able to find it from the summary abstract in the record, in the catalog record. The next highest percentage, we used a database. Remember, these were juvenile biographies, right? And so we used the Gale database, Kids Info Bits, and we found approximately 15% of them in there. The other place we found it is on the book cover, about 11%. So when you add all these and other, the other was 4.46. So when you add all these up, we get, we're closer to 100% than not. So there was the vast majority, we were able to, confirm this information. And then what we did is, because we had this information in Excel, we were able to basically kind of then cross-check the information that we were going to put through the various columns of the spreadsheet. So, we could confirm it from more than one place in a lot of cases, including title of book and other sorts of things. So hope that helps.
Yes, thank you, Peter. And someone requested if you could share the Qualtrics questions. And Sai said yes. So if you could send that to me, I'll be sure to make sure that our participants can view the questions that you asked for that Qualtrics audit.
Sure. Oh, we'll send it to you.
Thank you. And a next question is for UCF again. Do you cite the source used to add gender, race, ethnicity, and nationality information somewhere in the record or in internal documentation?
I think I replied in the chat. We do have a documentation in the, but we haven't added, the literature where we get those resources. I mean, we could add some like references and resources to the documentation. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then one last question for Amanda. You mentioned working with librarians and universities, with other librarians and universities, and making sure there was some consistency among thesauri terms. I'm curious what collaboration like that looks like in that area.
For the most part, that collaboration has been us looking to well-published or well-cited, published kind of listings online. So like starting with like the Home Source and GSSO, but also some universities have some pretty good lists depending on whatever the subject area is. So we kind of look for those that are out there and circulating. So that's not as much collaboration as us kind of making use of those tools. But we've done a couple of these presentations over the past few years and made some connections and are able to like have conversations with some of the librarians who are doing this work at other places. So it's just a good way to kind of brainstorm with other scholars and talk about the work that's being done. We haven't kind of engaged in any sort of formal partnerships to date, but we have reached out to faculty on our campus to provide feedback about our different collections and our online resources and stuff like that. So it's been helpful so far and might need to be more formal going forward.
Thank you, Amanda. And I guess that's a plug for people in Florida too. In the fall, we are planning, SSDN is planning to have some working sessions that can connect you with other professionals in your area so that we can try to work on these issues, some of these issues together in a more collaborative manner. So keep your eyes out for that if you're in Florida. And I don't see any more questions in the chat. So again, I'm just going to take a brief moment and thank all of our presenters again for sharing their projects and their approach to reparative metadata work. We appreciate your time and expertise, and we look forward to learning more from each other on this really important topic. So thanks everyone, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their week.